Good evening, and welcome to Sleepy Stories. Tonight's story is Cinderella, a pop-up fairy tale by Matthew Reinhardt. I hope you enjoy. Long ago, in a faraway land, a lovely baby girl was born to adoring parents. Soon afterward, a terrible illness stole her mother away, and her father remarried. Unfortunately, his choice for a new wife was a poor one, a harsh and greedy woman with two equally selfish daughters. She treated her husband and his daughters like servants. Feeling hopeless and distraught by the demands of his evil new wife, the girl's father fell gravely ill and died. Alas, the poor young girl was left with her cruel stepmother, who disliked the girl intensely because of her natural beauty and tender heart. While her nasty stepsisters lived in luxury, the young girl was forced to live like a pauper in the attic. The lonely girl wore tattered clothes and worked from day to night milking the cow, cooking the food, tending the garden, and cleaning the house, even the chimney. One day, she crawled from the chimney after a difficult sweep, only to be taunted by her cruel stepsisters. "Look at you, from head to foot, covered all over with cinders and soot." "Cinderella! Cinderella!" they sang. And from that day forth, she was known as Cinderella. As the years passed, Cinderella's stepmother became increasingly jealous of the girl's beauty and angered by her kind-hearted nature, and so she heaped more chores on the poor girl than ever before. Cinderella bore it all silently, since she had no one to look to help. Meanwhile, the king of this land had a problem of his own. His only son had traveled the countryside seeking a princess to marry, and had found no girl to his liking. Wishing to make his lovelorn son happy, the king planned a royal ball to be attended by every fair maiden in the kingdom, so that the prince would find true love. He sent messengers far and wide across the land to extend his royal invitations. Days later, the blare of a trumpet startled Cinderella from her daily chores. Outside the house, a young man bearing a royal coat of arms bowed to Cinderella and handed her the royal invitation, despite her ragged clothes. She flew inside to tell her stepmother and stepsisters of the exciting news. Sneering, her stepmother snatched the scroll from Cinderella's hand. Her beady eyes quickly scanned the words. "This invitation is not for a wretch like you, Cinderella," she snarled. "It calls for ladies of distinction, and I only see two here." She smiled at her daughters, who giggled at their mother's insult. They wasted no time, and immediately Cinderella was put to work readying her uppity sisters for the prince's royal affair. Talk of the upcoming ball filled the house for weeks, while Cinderella designed and stitched the intricate gowns, hemmed the petticoats, and styled the elaborate wigs. As she worked, Cinderella could not help but think how wonderful it would be to go to the ball. But alas, she knew it was not her fate. The day of the royal ball arrived, and Cinderella spent the time dressing and attending to her ungrateful stepsisters. Even though her elder stepsister hadn't eaten a thing for days, Cinderella broke more than a dozen laces trying to cinch her corset tight into a slender shape. It took hours to powder and paint their faces and arrange their towering wigs. As she sat impatiently waiting for Cinderella to put the final touches on her wig, the elder sister sweetly asked, "Cinderella, my dear sister, do you still want to go to the prince's ball?" "Certainly I do," said Cinderella excitedly, "but I have neither a dress nor means to go." Looking over Cinderella's shabby clothing, her stepmother replied, "You are quite right. Besides, why would a dashing prince invite a miserable creature like you to a royal ball?" "Perhaps to wash the master's dishes and clean the royal stables," the younger sisters answered, as the three haughty women burst into cruel laughter. The words stung bitterly. Cinderella had been nothing but a slave to them. After all her help in preparing them for the ball, they still mocked and belittled her. With tears welling in her eyes, Cinderella dropped the hairbrush she was using and ran from the house. As the sun set, her stepsisters and stepmother boarded a coach for the ball, still gloating over Cinderella's humiliation. Watching from her attic window, Cinderella wept to herself in the early moonlight. In her despair, Cinderella failed to notice a twitch from behind the rose bushes outside, and in a flash, a kindly old woman dressed in a gossamer robe and twinkled like stars came to comfort the weeping girl. "Dear child," asked the strange woman, "why are you crying?" "I wish I could go to the ball," Cinderella sobbed. "For just one night, I want to leave this place and be happy again." The old woman smiled. "Well, it happens that I am your fairy godmother, and I'll do everything to make your wishes come true." Pulling an ivory wand from the folds of her dress, the fairy godmother motioned back to the garden. "Now fetch me a pumpkin." Cinderella immediately gathered the plumpest pumpkin she could find and laid it before her godmother. With a strike of her ivory wand, the fairy godmother transformed the pumpkin into a delicate silver and gold carriage bedecked with shimmering jewels. "Now bring me some mice, child," said the fairy godmother. "We need something to pull his carriage." Following her godmother's request, Cinderella rushed from the barn carrying a large mouse trap filled with 6 scurrying white mice and a fat black rat. As the mice left the open trap, the fairy godmother gave each little tap with her magic wand, turning them all into dashing steeds and sweeping manes and clattering hooves. With the trap still open, the fat black rat poked his whiskered head out to see what was causing all the commotion, and with another flick of her wand, the fairy godmother turned him into a fat, jolly coachman with a shiny black beard. Looking about, the fairy godmother said to Cinderella, "I think we need 6 lizards near the rose bush. Please bring them to me." Cinderella had no sooner done so than her godmother turned the lizards into 6 footmen dressed in emerald and gold. She said to Cinderella, "Now, my child, you are off to the prince's ball." But Cinderella looked down at herself. "I fear I am not," she replied. "Not even a court jester would be allowed into a royal palace in these shabby clothes. Oh my, "I forgot," said her fairy godmother. With a merry laugh, she touched Cinderella with her ivory wand. At that instant, the threadbare rags turned into a glittering gown of silk adorned with colored jewels and gossamer ribbons, and on Cinderella's feet were a glistening pair of dainty glass slippers. The fairy godmother paused to admire her work. "I have but one warning, my child," she said to Cinderella. "Be certain to leave the ball before the clock strikes midnight, for that is when my magic spell will end and all will return to the way it was." Scarcely able to contain her joy and excitement, Cinderella promised she would do so, and then eagerly climbed into the magic coach and sped off to the prince's ball. Cinderella was speechless when she arrived at the royal palace. She had never seen anything so grand in all her life. Hundreds of courtiers dressed in lavish finery paraded across the marble floors. As Cinderella exited her shining coach, everyone stopped to stare in awe of the beautiful, mysterious visitor. Whispers traveled quickly throughout the court, and soon the prince was told of an arrival of a stunning princess whom no one knew. He rushed to greet Cinderella and was instantly taken by her loveliness. Before the dancing began, the guests were treated to a scrumptious banquet. The prince ate little, so bewitched was he by Cinderella's beauty. As fate would have it, Cinderella was seated next to her two selfish stepsisters, who did not even recognize her. Thinking her to be a princess from some far-off land, the shallow sisters fawned over Cinderella, complimenting everything about her. Cinderella returned the flattery. "My, such lovely gowns," she said. "Who is your seamstress?" "Only the finest and most expensive tailor in the kingdom," they replied. Cinderella smiled to herself, knowing that she had made both gowns with her own hands. After the grand feast, the prince led Cinderella into the ballroom. "May I have this dance, fair maiden?" he inquired. Cinderella blushed and smiled timidly. "I've never danced before," she replied. "I would be honored to show you," offered the prince. He bowed and took her hand, leading Cinderella through the crowds of the royal court. The prince swept her across the entire ballroom floor in a grand waltz. Cinderella laughed as she danced with the charming young prince, never feeling so free before. The old king smiled as he watched his son and the mysterious princess dance gracefully to the music. His son was smitten for sure. The beautiful girl had enchanted the whole place with her matchless beauty and her simple charm. The evening passed quickly, and soon the palace clock struck 11 3/4, reminding Cinderella of her godmother's warning. Reluctantly, she excused herself from the prince and hurried away as fast as she could. She fled, nimble as a deer, moving so quickly that she did not notice that one of her glass slippers had slid off and was left behind. The prince followed, but could not catch up with her. Cinderella dashed outside the palace before the magic spell wore off. At the final stroke of midnight, the enchanted gown quickly changed back into tattered rags. The magical coach became a pumpkin once again, and the mice, lizards, and rat all scurried into the darkness. Cinderella hurried to reach home before her stepmother and stepsisters arrived. Meanwhile, the prince searched the palace grounds in vain for his elusive princess. He did not even know her name. He questioned the guards at the palace gate, but they had seen no one but a beragged peasant girl. The only clue to find this princess was the single glass slipper that she left behind. So the prince decreed that he would marry the girl whose foot fit the shoe, and he began a quest throughout the kingdom to find the mysterious girl that he had met and lost. Soon many maidens tried on the slipper, but none was successful in getting it to fit. Weeks later, the prince's entourage arrived at Cinderella's house. Having returned to her life of hard labor, Cinderella knew little of the prince's quest and was surprised to hear of the blare of royal trumpets. Excited, she ran to meet the prince and his entourage, but her stepmother blocked her path. Through clenched teeth, the wicked woman whispered, "One of my daughters will marry the prince, and I do not want a filthy little urchin like you getting in the way." And she locked the poor girl in a broom closet while the two foolish stepsisters flirted unsuccessfully with the prince. "Oh, my sweet prince, you found my shoe," the older sister said as she tried on the glass slipper. However, her foot was far too fat. The younger sister chuckled. "My sister is mistaken, for the glass slipper belongs to me." But like her sister, her foot would not fit into the dainty glass shoe. Relieved that neither girl fit the slipper, the prince rose to leave the cottage. With all her might, she kicked and pounded the closet door and yelled at the top of her lungs, hoping someone from the prince's entourage would hear her. Soon enough, the prince did hear the commotion. Ignoring the feeble excuses of Cinderella's stepmother, he opened the heavy closet door and found a beautiful servant girl in tattered clothes. "Your Majesty, I would like to try on the shoe," she said. Her stepsisters burst out laughing, but the prince looked at the ragged girl and saw something was there. He smiled and said, "Every maiden in the kingdom must try, as was my decree." The prince knelt down to fit the glass slipper on Cinderella's foot and discovered that it fit perfectly. Astonished, her two stepsisters wailed in disbelief. Magically, as if her fairy godmother's spell had been cast again, Cinderella's rags turned into splendid finery, and the prince jumped to his feet. Realizing Cinderella was the mysterious princess, her stepsisters and stepmother threw themselves at her feet to beg pardon for all their malicious treatment. Hearing of their wickedness towards Cinderella, the prince sought to punish the cruel women. However, Cinderella graciously interceded and left them behind to tend to their own chores. She never again returned to her childhood home. Upon the return to the palace, the young couple was greeted with cheers from all across the kingdom, for a royal wedding was cause for a great celebration. Cinderella and her prince had found each other at last, and they would live happily ever